It is I, Tantus Naraban Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the history of Magic the Gathering. Today, we're introducing you to the 8th core set, 8th edition. So 8th edition was released on July 29th of 2003 and had 357 cards. It was released as a marking of the 10th anniversary of Magic the Gathering. Now, its symbol was an 8th over the top of a sort of fan of cards to sort of represent, I guess, a core set at this point in time. Now, it had cards from every expansion dating all the way back to Alpha up to this point in time. It included all of them, though it did have 7 fixed cards in a core set pack. It introduced a new card face that had included more area for both art and text box. Now it added in reminder text for flying, so that it would kind of give you a bit of information about what flying really was. It was the first core set to see the keyword of fear printed in place of what the ability had been up to now, just the words written out. It changed the tap symbol. A simple, easy-to-see curved arrow with a square behind it to represent tapping. And it introduced the new super type basic land. Basically, more than just being a land, it now was a basic land. So the frames around everything were, of course, narrowed and redesigned with this, but they also put boxes around the card name and power and toughness. Font was updated for more modern statistics, and the colors around mana symbols in artifacts in their text boxes was removed. So no longer did they have colors around those. Now, there were players that did not like the change in the format to the cards. Of course, with every big change, there is always something like that. They combined it, didn't really fit with the kind of feeling of the cards itself. There was a problem, though, between white and artifact cards. It was hard to tell them apart. It wasn't until 5th Dawn, a set that we're going to talk about in the future, came out, that they made artifacts darker, and you could actually begin to tell them apart again. Otherwise, before then, you could sometimes get the two of them confused for a little while there. They also then, in Ravinica, corrected some of the gray around the mana symbols there. So this was, of course, marketed as a core set. And one of the unique things is, of course, they were trying to release it coinciding with the 10th anniversary of Magic. They voted on the MagicTheGathering.com website for cards that had not been printed in a core set before, from every one of the 34 expansions of Magic the Gathering that had been out up until now to be released within this one. So we saw that. We saw at least one card of all of those expansions which had not been in a core set now appearing. New artwork was created for each of these cards. Now, they did have a Magic Global Celebration tournament on July 26th and 27th. And during this time, if you participated, you got a special foil rook egg. And it is important to note that they had a token out with this set, a Rook token, for the Magic Player's Reward, a 4/4 type of bird, kind of matching with the Rook egg that we just talked about. Now, of course, it was released in 15 card booster packs, 5 theme decks, and a core game pack, which was effectively a 2-player starter set. It is important to note here that they did not have a tournament pack for this core set. Very interesting. The set did include randomly inserted premium versions of cards that were black bordered from the set. And it had oversized box topper cards at the top of booster boxes. So you could have special cards even at the top of booster boxes. 8th edition also did have a 24 card demo game set and a 10 card sampler pack. 2 important rules change that occurred during this time were, first off, the change in draw. Now, the first card you drew at the beginning of your draw step no longer triggered the stack. This means you automatically did this for something that would say at the beginning of your draw step or during your draw step. These would always occur after here, and nothing could interfere with the triggering of this. Now, this also did mean a lot of special drawing things were moved, of course, to the upkeep and stuff, but it separated out the fact that you could now draw that first card, first one you could draw, without interference. The other big thing was, of course, the introduction of the basic land super type, which I talked about earlier. They represented this that if it was a basic land, it would say basic land / say what the basic land was. Mountain, swamp, plains, island, forest. But this effectively allowed you to now indicate both with that it's a basic land and it's whatever type of basic land it is. It separated them more out into important types. So now you could still have a land that could possibly be something like a forest or a mountain, but if it doesn't say basic, it's not a basic land, and you can still use things that trigger with basic land. Now this set had, of course, 3 cycles to it. It first had the cycle of Circles of Protection. We had the Circle of Protection once again return to us, as they have for many of the core sets up until now. The only difference here is they changed from common to being uncommon cards. The other thing that we saw the return of is the Lucky Charms. Again, back from Unlimited. These are the ones that, when they're artifacts, they're in play. If a card of a certain color is played, you may pay 1 mana and gain a life. Finally, they had the tap lands. These were back from Invasion. They were effectively dual lands that tap for one of 2 colors. They were in Invasion. They're reprinted here. They come into play tapped, or you can then, once they become, you could tap them for either one of 2 allied colors. So the theme decks were a white deck called Life Boost, a blue deck called Sky Slam, a black deck called Expulsion, a red deck called Speed Scorch, and of course a green deck called Heavy Hitters. So there were 167 cards in this set that were not printed in 7th edition. This included, of course, the 34 cards that were never printed in a core set up until now. There were a number of cards that received rarity changes, just like those circle protections I mentioned. There were 160 cards that had been in 7th edition that did not appear in 8th. And of course, there were still 40 cards that had been printed up until now in every core set. 40 of them. 40 of them that had had 8 versions of them printed up until now. 9 if you separate alpha and beta. There were other number of important changes to mention. We dropped out Counterspell. This wouldn't be replaced until Cancel would come about, but Counterspell was considered to be too powerful, so it wasn't printed in the core set anymore. We also saw that no merfolk were printed in the core set for the first time in quite a while, and we didn't see Llanowar Elves in this set. We saw Birds of Paradise basically put it in place of where Llanowar Elves would be, but no Llanowar Elves. Now let's talk about some of the cards that were released in this set. There was, of course, Archivist, a 1/1 wizard you could tap to draw a card. Beast of Burden. It's a star artifact creature. That star is equal to the number of creatures in play. So count up every creature in play, and that's both its power and its toughness. Blinding Angel. A 2/4 flying angel that when it deals combat damage to a player, they skip their next combat phase. Bribery. You search your opponent's library for a creature card, you put it into play under your control, that opponent shuffles their library. You steal something from an opponent. There was City of Brass. If you would tap City of Brass would deal 1 damage to you, but you could tap it for a mana of any color. Coastal Piracy. When a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Coat of Arms. Each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature that shares at least 1 type with it. So, the more creatures of the same type you have, the bigger that your creatures are. Creeping Mold. You destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. Diabolic Tutor. You search your library for a card, you put it in your hand, shuffle your library afterward. This is the standard for deck searching cards in black. Elvish Piper. For green, you tap it and put a creature card from your hand into play. This is a great one for getting out some big creatures for very little mana. Bungasaur. This is one I don't think I've really talked about before. It's a 2/2 that when it's dealt damage, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. There were plenty of interesting deck combinations I did to get Bungasaur very big in those early days. It was an interesting one to have in that retrospect. Bungasaur. It was reprinted here. Furnace of Wrath. When damage dealt to a creature or player, it takes double the amount of damage it would have normally taken. So Furnace of Wrath doubles damage to everything. Gaia's Herald. Creature spells can't be countered. Great one in a green deck. Great one in an elf deck, of course. Just prevents everything from being countered. Giant Badger. This, for some reason, is one of my favorite cards. Sort of like people love Stormcrow to no ends. I love Giant Badger. It's a 2/2. When it blocks, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Simple as that. Glorious Anthem. Creatures you control get +1/+1. This was that original replacement to Crusade that came out, and it's been printed in the core sets to replace it since. Grave Pact. When a creature you control is put into your graveyard from play, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Grave Pact has been the core of so many sacrificial decks to screw over every other player. Holy Day. It's White Fog. You play it and you prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. It's as simple as that, so it's effectively a white version of the Fog spell. Howling Mine. As long as Howling Mine is untapped at the beginning of each player's draw step, they draw an extra card. So, generally speaking, you know, if you could trigger the fact that you could tap it on your turn, and then, you know, you get the draw and no one else does, good for you. Or everybody draws a card when it's out. Intrepid Hero. You could tap Intrepid Hero to destroy target creature with a power of 4 or greater. It was effectively Reprisal the creature. I like this one because of it. I like the spell Reprisal, but this isn't in creature form, so you can kill a lot more things. Ivory Mask. You have Shroud. As simple as that. Larceny. When a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, that player must discard a card. Pretty good one there. Lord of the Undead. Other zombie creatures you control get +1/+1, and for a colorless and a black, you could tap Lord of the Undead to return a zombie card from your graveyard to your hand. They still continue with a lot of the tribal themes from the previously 2 blocks, which had been in Standard, you have to think about, and continued here, of course, with this core set, and had very good tribal themes with things like this. Magrim. Whenever a opponent discards a card, Magrim deals 2 damage to them. So if you're playing a discard deck, you're screwing people a lot. Millstone. 2 tap. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library in their graveyard. It's the invention of the mill mechanic. Milling someone's deck based on Millstone. Noble Purpose. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, you gain that much life. Stacks with lifelink, because lifelink says damage. This one says combat damage. Little trick there that I'm educating you on. Obliterate. It can't be countered. Destroy all artifacts, creatures, and lands. They cannot be regenerated. It's a big red board wipe that's pretty good. Phyrexian Arena. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life, draw a card. So if you were just playing black and want to get a lot of extra cards, that's great. Or if you're playing maybe with a little bit of life gain, hey, there's a way that you can use that life to an advantage. Phyrexian Plague Lord. This one I think goes greatly with Grave Pact, which I talked about previously. It has 2 activate abilities. You could tap Sacrifice it to then have target creature get -4/-4 until end of turn. Or you could just sacrifice a creature and have target creature get -1/-1 until end of turn. Token deck, black, Grave Pact. Easily sacrifice a lot of things and have opponents sacrifice a lot of things. Planar Portal. 6 tap. Search your library for a card, put it into your hand. Shuffle your library. Simple as that. It's the ultimate sort of search your library for anything you want repeatedly artifact. Rocks. It's a 5/5 for 2 green and for 2 colorless and a green. It regenerates. You may have it deal damage as if it were not blocked. It's a strike-through creature. Rolling Stones. Walls can attack as if they did not have Defender. So wall creatures no longer are treated as if they don't have the Defender ability and can, well, attack then. If you're making some kind of aggressive wall deck, it's kind of a necessity. Sacred Ground. If a spell or ability opponent controls causes a land you control to be put in the graveyard, you put it back into play. So it prevents basically land destruction from affecting you from an opponent. Skull of Orm. For 5 tap, you return a enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. So if you're playing an enchantment deck, Skull of Orm is pretty useful. It allows you to get back a lot of them, especially if they should end up in your graveyard. Spellbook. It is 0 mana cost. You have no maximum hand size. Simple as that. Telepathy. Your opponents play with their hands revealed. You see everybody's hands. They see each other's hands too, but only yours remains hidden. Tidal Kraken is a 6/6 creature. It cannot be blocked. It's unblockable. Tidal Kraken is very nasty and good. Urza's Armor. If a source would deal you damage, it deals 1 less damage. So if something's just dealing you 1 at a time, something like Pestilence, let's say, Urza's Armor makes you ignore it completely. If you have a couple armors, well, you keep subtracting from these sources one at a time until you pretty much get down to 0. Warp Devotion. Whenever a permanent is returned to an opponent's hand, that opponent then discards a card. So effectively, if you're playing a discard deck that maybe has a little blue in to bounce things back to an opponent's hand, well, Warp Devotion's the kind of card that you want in there. Worship. As long as you control the creature, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 instead reduces it to 1. Doesn't matter the kind of damage it does, it makes it only 1. So, that's it for today. I introduce you to 8th edition. This was the beginning of the new, more modern format of cards. We're seeing an evolution in the way that cards appear. Granted, we haven't taken all the final steps leading us into what's more what we call the modern version of Magic. They're still working out some of those kinks, as you can see with the artifacts and some of the coloration they have. But this is a step towards what we know now. And this was also a 10th anniversary set. It marked the 10th anniversary of Magic. It had cards from every expansion, all 34 of them, up until now. That's an amazing thing to do, that they had so many different cards from so many different sources in one set, and it still felt like it fit with what everything was going on with the sort of standard cards. There had been a heavy tribal feeling. There were lots of important tribal cards in these sets. Things for elves and zombies and goblins. This set maybe didn't do anything super great and new with its mechanics or anything because it was a core set, but it was an important core set for not only the changes in the cards, but the fact that they looked back at everything and showed us some cards from every set that people wanted. People wanted to play it again. And it was such an excellent selection for, of course, new players. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon. Link description below. If you want to check out some other great Magic the Gathering content, I can recommend my friends of the multiverse, Card Bazaar, They Said We Said, and Tasty Stackies. They do some great Magic the Gathering work. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.